I think it's proper to occasionally let people know exactly where I'm coming from on these things, so before we start, I'd like to state that as a general rule, I fucking hate make-believe found footage movies. You know, these movies that pretend they're actually a bunch of lost camcorder tapes or old film reels shot by people during some horror event. Yeah, I detest that shit. Not all the movies, understand, just the general universe surrounding the genre. It's a niche conceit with a very limited number of appropriate uses, and more often than not, it's employed by pretentious film school brats to cover up a lack of talent, budget, or both. I bring this up because when I tell you that Paranormal Activity is really good, oh yeah, spoiler warning for the rest of the review, Paranormal Activity is really good. I want you to know that I'm not one of these guys who loses his shit over every no-frills, looks like it was shot on a fucking camera phone novelty that the Dogme 95 or Mumblecore or whatever bullshit artists want you to think is the next evolution of movie making. No, sir, I don't drink that Kool-Aid. I piss in it. Look, basically I want you to take away from this that Paranormal Activity must be a good movie, because even I liked it. You know why I like this better than almost all the other mock verite found footage horror movies? It all comes down to one word. Tripod. See, the main idea here is you got this young couple who thinks they've got a ghost in the house that fucks with them while they sleep, so they put a stationary camcorder in the bedroom to try to catch him in the act. In other words, it's a near-perfect marriage of form and function. The use of what amounts to a fixed security camera as a high-tech way to cut through an audience's built-in, well-learned defense against what is literally the oldest scary story in human history. Something going bump in the night. Most of the big stuff happens from this one fixed master shot, so whereas most fake documentary movies use it as an excuse not to show stuff, this one uses it to make sure it shows stuff in unblinking, unflinching clarity. And even when they do use a handheld camera, they carry it like a normal human being carries a camera. None of that Cloverfield shit where it becomes ridiculously obvious that no human being who's moving like the shot indicates he's moving would ever still be carrying a fucking camera. Also a nice change of pace, something actually happening. Don't worry, this isn't one of those movies where something might be going on. There are effects, there are physical manifestations, there is definitely a big, scary, invisible something in there with these people. It's capable of doing some serious damage, and it means business. In fact, a good deal of the plot concerns an increasing plausibility that it's not a ghost at all, that the woman in question claims to have been intermittently bugged by an invisible attacker since she was a little girl, with the implication that the presence is something more like a demon being floated early on. And as the 5 or 6 of you who took my advice and saw Drag Me to Hell can attest, demons are not to be fucked with. Another thing I like is that the movie avoids doing the usual thing with the ostensible male lead. Since he starts out overly self-assured and not entirely buying his girlfriend's sense of imminent danger, we assume he'll eventually reveal himself as a total coward, but that's not the case. Oh sure, he's definitely kind of a douche, but his tough guy stance is not a put-on. Whenever whatever it is shows up, he's all out in front like, "Get away from my girl!" like he's gonna beat it up or something. Granted, not the smartest approach, but at least he's a brave dumb shit. That counts for something with me. Of course, by now the hype on this thing is so out of control that by the time this runs, we'll probably be already in the backlash zone, which is to be expected. You probably shouldn't go in expecting the scariest thing ever, or the next evolution in fear, or whatever the ads are saying. It's a solid version of the oldest story in the book, executed in a novel way. Nothing more, nothing less. And under proper circumstances, it's a fun, gimmicky scarefest best enjoyed with a big crowd. It's not going to change your life, it's not going to do anything to the horror landscape, but it will give you a good time at the movies. Yeah, so this will be followed by a review for Paranormal Activity 2, the second one right after this. So Paranormal Activity, and my opinion has gone back and forth about these movies, which is now a series since this has come out, and since this review was done. I still very much appreciate the first one. I think the second one holds up for the most part. I've gone back and forth as to whether or not this was something that was like the beginning of something good that went awry, or just the start of this analog horror craze, which I've now become completely sick of. And I know I say that as someone who works on YouTube videos, both for myself and for other outlets, where this is now like the bread and butter of the streaming YouTube era filmmaking, horror, independent scene, is this the analog horror business, and most of it is in fact garbage. Most of it very quickly went from, hey, we're remixing and defying cliches, to setting up a rigid set of cliches, much more cliched and trope-driven than anything in the slasher genre, haunted house genre, torture porn genre that ever existed before. If I never see another stuffed into an animatronic suit jumping out at people from a jump scare thing, it'll be too soon. It's all the same stuff, but, you know, this, and even though I'm not a Blair Witch fan by any means, the first one of those had real, at least doing something new energy to them, and in that regard it holds up. It was really doing new, interesting stuff at the time, and it still weirds me out. Even just watching the review of this and seeing the clips again for the first time reminds me that, wow, this was really effective, new feeling stuff. None of it can hold still a candle to like Ghost Watch, or even the straightforward version of similar fare, like The Changeling, things like that. But yeah, the original of this is really still spooky stuff for something that did break so many of what are thought of as conventional rules for its genre. So I'm sure that we'll be getting reboots and remixes of this again, but hey, you know, that's part of what looking back is about. In 2007, an Israeli video game designer named Oren Peli spent 7 days and a paltry $15,000 to make a shot-on-video independent haunted house movie called Paranormal Activity. In 2009, it caught the eye of some powerful Hollywood players, including the powerful Hollywood player. At first, the big guys wanted to buy it so they could do a remake, but when they saw how much people at screenings were getting into it, they figured they might as well just release the original. They did, and it ended up earning, significantly more than $15,000. When an indie movie makes that kind of impact, the result is usually a pat on the back and an invitation to make bigger movies, which Mr. Peli got. However, this wasn't just an indie movie, it was an indie horror movie, and in Hollywood, that means it gets something else, too. A hastily greenlit cash grab sequel. And then things got weird. See, Oren Peli is busy working on his follow-up project, so they had to get a new director. First, they picked Kevin Greatert, who ironically was the director of Saw 6, the movie the first Paranormal Activity famously crushed at the box office. But then Twisted Pictures, the guys who produced the Saw movies, exercised a clause in Greatert's contract requiring him to come and make Saw 7 instead, now called Saw 3D. A fella named Todd Williams, best known for a pair of pretty good art house dramas from a few years back, and for having been married to Famke Janssen and Gretchen Mol, not at the same time of course, otherwise you probably would have heard of him before now, directed it instead. I'm telling you this story, by the way, because it's way more interesting than the movie is. Incidentally, I'm gonna have to toss the spoiler warning up here now, because not only is it impossible to review this without giving away some plot, it also requires me to spoil the ending of the first movie too, so you've been warned. In 3, 2, 1... Okay, so remember how part 1 ended with the haunted couple Mika and Katie being murdered and or possessed? Well, part 2 now picks up with Katie's relatives. Something weird is going on in their house, and they've got a new baby they're worried about, so they decide to get in on the whole security camera game. And since we're evidently following the bigger equals better school of sequel production, this time it's a whole bunch of cameras in different rooms and different angles. And yeah, it certainly helps change up the pace a bit, but like everything else here, it just serves to give us too much visual information and dilute the tension, ultimately making it laughable that nobody figures things out any sooner. Although, speaking of which, as if we weren't already tired of the spiritually hypersensitive Latino stereotype after Devil, well, start buttering that toast. Since, as we all know, the forces of darkness are such drama queens, as soon as the video feed is up, stuff really starts to hit the fan, and soon enough we get our big hook for the story, which was probably supposed to be a surprise, but was already given away by pretty much all the publicity. But just in case, spoiler alert, Katie's back. And so is Mika! See, the movie actually takes place before, during, and after the original, and the meat of the story involves expanding and explaining the mythology of what's actually going on. The twist involved in that is actually kinda clever, though, much like the expanded visuals, the expanded explanations, you guessed it, just make everything much less scary. Part of the problem going into this is that much like with the similarly ill-advised Blair Witch sequel that we all agreed to forget existed, small-scale funhouse gimmick horror like the first film are really only built to work once. A slow, gradual, movie-length metamorphosis from everything seems normal to full-on poltergeist-style freak-out at the very end. Remember how freaky it was in the first one when you got that quick glimpse of the footprints and you realize, wait, those aren't human footprints? Oh crap, this is way worse than just a ghost, isn't it? Well, a sequel really can't do that, because now we already know how far stuff can go, so there's really no choice for the movie but to just keep doing bigger and sillier stuff in a desperate attempt to keep our attention, and yeah, it gets old. The first time around, the last act was like crazy because you didn't know what was coming next, but here, you basically spend the allegedly intense final minutes going,
"Come on, do the throw people thing. We know you can do it, you did it last time. Come on, hurry up, I wanna go home, this is boring."
So, it's not terrible, but it's pretty pointless. The thrill is gone, it's all just another predictable haunting flick now. There's much worse stuff out there, believe me, but I would not rush right out and see this.